Most people don't fail loudly. They fail quietly, while everyone around them thinks they're doing just fine. No warning, no collapse, just a slow, invisible unraveling that almost no one notices until it's too late. Ethan was the kind of man people described as solid. Not extraordinary, not flashy, just dependable. He woke up early, drove the same route to work, drank his coffee black, and nodded politely at coworkers whose names he mostly knew. He paid his bills on time, he didn't complain, he didn't cause problems. From the outside, Ethan's life looked stable, respectable even. He had a decent job in operations at a mid-sized logistics company. Not exciting, but secure. He'd been there nearly 12 years. Promotions came slowly, but they came. Raises were small but predictable. His parents were proud of him. His friends admired his consistency. Some even envied it. "You've got it figured out," people told him. Ethan usually smiled when they said that. Sometimes he nodded. But when he was alone, especially late at night, he felt something else. A quiet pressure in his chest. A sense that he was standing still while time moved forward without him. It wasn't unhappiness exactly, it was something harder to describe. Like living a life that technically worked but didn't feel like it belonged to him. He'd learned early how to be invisible with his struggles. Growing up, Ethan was the middle child. Not the achiever, not the problem, just there. He learned that being low maintenance kept things peaceful, that not asking for too much made life easier for everyone. So he became good at managing himself, good at swallowing frustration, good at saying, "I'm fine," good at smiling when he wasn't sure what he wanted. By his mid-30s, that habit had turned into a habit, and that habit had quietly shaped his entire life. At work, Ethan noticed things others didn't. Inefficiencies, better systems, missed opportunities. He had ideas, good ones. But meetings moved fast, voices were loud, confidence mattered more than insight. So Ethan stayed quiet. He told himself it wasn't worth rocking the boat, that someone else would say it, that he didn't want attention. Weeks turned into years. Younger employees came in, spoke boldly, took risks. Some failed, some succeeded. Ethan watched them pass him, not because they were smarter, but because they were louder. At home, evenings were quiet. Too quiet. After a long-term relationship ended in his early 30s, he never really tried again. Dating felt like effort. Vulnerability felt risky. He told himself he was content being alone. But sometimes, sitting on his couch at night scrolling through his phone, he wondered if content was just another word for afraid. Afraid of asking for more. Afraid of being seen. Afraid of finding out that his quiet dissatisfaction actually mattered. He didn't talk about this with anyone. Why would he? Nothing was wrong. That's how silent failure begins. Not with disaster, but with denial.
The turning point didn't come with an argument, a firing, or a dramatic breakdown. It came in the form of a conversation Ethan almost didn't have. One afternoon, his company announced a restructuring. Departments would merge, roles would shift, leadership positions would open, and some would disappear. During the meeting, Ethan listened carefully. There was an opening, a new managerial role, one that aligned perfectly with his experience. For the first time in years, something inside him stirred. He imagined himself stepping forward, applying, speaking up, being considered. That night, he stayed late, staring at his computer screen long after the office emptied. The application form sat open. He reread the requirements. He met every single one. Yet his fingers didn't move. A familiar voice surfaced in his mind. "You're not ready. Someone else wants it more. Why risk rejection when you're already stable?" He closed the laptop and went home. But the thought didn't leave him. The next day, he ran into Marcus in the break room, a colleague who had started 3 years after him. Marcus was younger, louder, less experienced. "I'm going for the manager role," Marcus said casually, sipping his coffee. "Figure I'll see what happens." Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. "That's great," he said. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, lights dim, city noise humming outside. And something inside him finally cracked. Not loudly, but deeply. It wasn't jealousy, it was recognition. He realized this wasn't the first opportunity he'd let pass, it was just the clearest. And suddenly, a terrifying question surfaced. What if my biggest problem isn't fear of failure, but fear of being visible? He thought about the years he'd spent waiting to feel ready, waiting to be noticed, waiting for permission that never came. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. The next morning, with hands slightly shaking, he reopened the application. And for the first time in his adult life, he applied for something he actually wanted. He didn't tell anyone. He just pressed submit and sat back, heart racing, not with excitement, but with exposure. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing. He had crossed an invisible line.
The interview was harder than he expected, not because he lacked skill, but because he lacked practice speaking about himself. He stumbled over answers, downplayed his achievements, softened his confidence. But he stayed in the room. A week later, the email arrived. He didn't get the position. The disappointment hit harder than he'd imagined. For days, Ethan felt foolish. "See?" the old voice whispered. "This is why you don't try." Marcus got the role. At work, Ethan congratulated him sincerely, and surprisingly, he meant it. But something had changed. The rejection didn't break Ethan, it revealed him. For the first time, he noticed how often he minimized himself, how often he chose comfort over growth, how silence had become his default defense. And he realized something uncomfortable. Failing openly hurt, but failing silently had been costing him years. Ethan started small. In meetings, he spoke once, just once, when he had something useful to say. His voice sounded strange at first, unfamiliar, but people listened. Some nodded, some asked questions. Nothing dramatic happened. The world didn't collapse. At home, he reached out to an old friend he'd lost touch with, then another. He didn't overshare. He didn't reinvent himself. He just stopped disappearing. Months passed. Ethan wasn't suddenly transformed. He didn't become fearless or bold overnight, but he became honest with himself. He applied for another role later that year. This time, he prepared differently. He asked for feedback, practiced speaking clearly, owned his experience. He got that job, not because he was the loudest, but because he finally showed up. Yet the biggest consequence wasn't professional, it was internal. Ethan no longer felt invisible in his own life. And that quiet pressure in his chest, it didn't vanish, but it softened. Because now, when he felt stuck, he knew it wasn't fate. It was a choice. Most people don't fail because they lack talent, intelligence, or opportunity. They fail because they stay silent, especially with themselves. Silent failure looks like staying in roles that no longer fit, avoiding conversations that matter, calling fear patience, calling comfort contentment, waiting for confidence instead of acting without it. Psychologically, silence feels safe. It protects us from judgment, rejection, and discomfort. But over time, it also protects us from growth. The mind adapts to avoidance. The longer we stay quiet, the harder it becomes to speak. And the danger isn't one big missed chance. It's the accumulation of small, quiet decisions that slowly shape a life we didn't choose. Ethan didn't succeed because he suddenly became brave. He succeeded because he became aware. Aware that silence isn't neutral, it's a decision. And awareness is where change begins. So here's a question worth sitting with. In your own life, where have you been silent, not because you had nothing to say, but because speaking felt risky? And if you don't change that, what might that silence cost you 5 years from now? Sometimes the loudest failure is the one no one ever sees.